Before I begin my story, allow me to introduce myself first. My name is Mike Reeves, and for the past 15 years, I've been navigating the winding streets of Salem, Massachusetts as an ambulance driver. There might be no better place to encounter strange occurrences than this city, famed for its mystical history. However, what I'm about to share isn't about witches or ancient curses. This is about real experiences that defy logic or science. I grew up in a family full of medical professionals. My father was an ER doctor and my mother a pediatric nurse. Being part of emergency medical services has been a calling I've felt since childhood. After 4 years in the Navy as a medical technician, I returned to Salem and found a new home with the Salem County EMS Red Cross. My partner, Sarah Donovan, is one of the most talented paramedics I've ever met. Her bright red hair matches her fiery temperament, and her sharp green eyes seem capable of cutting through any lie. She moved to Salem 10 years ago after a personal tragedy she rarely discusses. All I know is that she lost her husband and daughter in a house fire, and since then, she's devoted her life to saving others. We've been a team for 8 years, working long and often exhausting night shifts. Our routine has become something of a synchronized dance. I know when she needs a strong black coffee, usually after a major trauma case, and she knows when I need silence, typically after losing a patient, especially a child. Our ambulance, Unit Number 7, is our second home. We call her Valkyrie, the Norse mythological being who carries the souls of heroes to the afterlife. Sometimes the name feels all too fitting. In this line of work, you develop a certain instinct, a gut feeling that something is wrong, even before the monitors show deteriorating vitals. But some experiences go beyond instinct or coincidence, entering the realm of the unexplainable. These are 3 stories that still haunt us to this day. Winter in Salem can be brutal, but the February 2020 snowstorm was one of the worst in the city's collective memory. 4 consecutive days of relentless snowfall, winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour, and temperatures dropping to minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit with wind chill. Many roads were closed, and only emergency vehicles were permitted to operate. Our night shift was nearly over when the call came in at 2:17 a.m. Unit 7, we've got a code blue at 1847 Cherry Street, came the dispatcher's voice over the radio. Elderly female, severe breathing difficulties. Dispatch received the call, but the line was cut off. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Cherry Street? On a night like this? Cherry Street lies in the old part of Salem, lined with ancient Victorian homes, most of which have been converted into apartments or antique shops. However, the far end of the street mentioned in the call is more isolated, where a few large homes still stand like eerie shadows from the past. Maybe their generator's down and she needs respiratory equipment, I said as I turned the ambulance northeastward. Our GPS showed the location was about 12 minutes away, but in such weather, the trip took nearly 30. When we finally turned onto Cherry Street, snow had piled up to 3 feet in some places. This is impassable, I muttered, eyeing the road ahead. Sarah checked our gear. We'll have to go on foot. It shouldn't be far. With gear bags on our backs and a portable stretcher in tow, we began trudging through the storm. House numbers were barely visible, but eventually we found 1847, a large Victorian home with a small turret on one side and a wraparound porch. No lights were on. Strange, said Sarah. No footprints, no signs of life. She was right. The snow on the lawn and steps was untouched, as if no one had come or gone during the storm. Maybe they're trapped inside without power, I offered, though doubt had begun to creep in. We climbed the steps and I rang the bell. No response. I knocked, then pounded harder. Still nothing. Emergency medical services. We received an emergency call from this address, I shouted. When I tried the doorknob, I was startled to find it unlocked. The door creaked open with a long groan, unnatural amid the howling wind. The interior was dark and cold, even colder than outside. The air was thick with dust and a heavy, sweet scent, like old perfume. By flashlight, we could see antique furniture covered in white sheets, unpolished wooden floors, and peeling wallpaper. Hello? Emergency medical services. Is anyone here? Sarah called, her voice echoing through the empty space. We began checking the rooms. The living room was filled with antique furnishings, seemingly untouched for years. In the dining room, a long table was still set with dusty porcelain plates and tarnished silverware. No signs of recent occupancy. "Mike, this house is empty," Sarah said, frustration in her voice. "Maybe dispatch got the address wrong." "Let's check the upstairs to be sure," I insisted, though an uneasy feeling had taken root. The stairs groaned under our weight as we ascended to the second floor. A long hallway stretched out with several closed doors on either side. The first room was a bedroom with a four-poster bed, neatly made with white lace sheets. The second was a bathroom with a clawfoot tub and cracked mirror. Nothing unusual. But as we neared the third door at the end of the hall, the temperature suddenly plummeted. Even in our thick jackets, I felt a chill pierce straight to the bone. "You feel that?" Sarah whispered. I nodded, unsure what to say. My hand trembled slightly as I grasped the doorknob and opened it. The room was a study or small library, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a large window overlooking the backyard. In the center sat an old rocking chair, slowly moving. "Hello?" I called out, my voice higher than usual. The chair kept rocking. Sarah signaled for me to stay put and slowly approached the chair. With one swift motion, she stepped in front of it, only to find it empty. Yet the chair continued to rock. "Mike," Sarah whispered, "the chair is warm." Before I could respond, our radio burst with loud static, startling us both. Instead of our familiar dispatcher's voice, we heard the raspy voice of an elderly woman.
"Help! I can't breathe."
The voice came from our radio itself, not through the headset or comm system. Sarah stared at the device in her hand, pale-faced.
"Help! So cold. Can't..."
The voice was cut off by a horrible coughing fit, a choking sound that sent chills down my spine. Then the radio returned to normal with the dispatcher's voice asking for our status.
Unit 7, what's your status at Cherry Street? Did you find the patient?
Sarah's hand trembled as she pressed the button to respond. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. No patient on site. The house appears empty."
"Strange,"
the dispatcher replied.
the call was clear. Elderly woman with breathing difficulty. She gave her name. Hold on. Eleanor Marsh.
Sarah and I exchanged looks. "Can you repeat that name?" I asked.
Eleanor Marsh. Call came in at exactly 2:17.
We completed our search of the house, checking every corner to ensure no one was in need. Finding nothing, we returned to the ambulance with an inexplicable sense of dread. The next day, after our shift ended, I visited the town records office. An elderly clerk helped me look up the history of 1847 Cherry Street. "Oh, the Marsh house," he said, pulling a thick folder. "It's been empty since '93. No one wants to buy it." "Why?" I asked. "Well, it's a sad story. Eleanor Marsh, the elderly woman who lived there, died alone during the Great Blizzard of 1993. The power went out and she suffered from severe emphysema. Her oxygen equipment failed. She managed to call 911, but the ambulance couldn't reach her due to the heavy snow. My heart sank. When did she die? The clerk checked the file. February 17th, 1993. She was found 2 days later when the roads were finally cleared. When I checked our call records, the date of the call from that empty house was February 17th, 2020, exactly 27 years after Eleanor Marsh's death. And the time of the call? 2:17 a.m., the same time recorded when Eleanor had dialed 911 on her last night. Even more chilling, when Sarah and I returned to Cherry Street the next day to confirm, house number 1847 wasn't there. Between 1845 and 1849 was only an empty plot of land with remnants of an old foundation. According to neighbors, Eleanor Marsh's house burned down 5 years after her death and was never rebuilt. Salem, like most cities in New England, has stark social contrasts. On one side, there's the famous historic district, and on the other, industrial slums. But there are also hidden pockets of wealth rarely known to tourists, one of them being Pinewood Estates. Nestled in the hills west of Salem, Pinewood Estates is an exclusive gated community, mostly inhabited by wealthy retirees from Boston or New York seeking peace and privacy. The entrance is guarded 24/7 with advanced security systems and armed guards. In October 2022, we received a code black call from one of the homes in Pinewood. A code black typically means a possible death, used when someone is found unresponsive or not breathing for an extended time.
Unit 7, we've got a code black at 42 Evergreen Circle, Pinewood Estates,
said the dispatcher. A woman called in, reporting her husband isn't breathing in bed. Copy that, replied Sarah. Unit 7 en route, ETA 12 minutes. I took a deep breath. Code blacks are always tough, but it's even harder when a spouse is the one who finds their partner dead. During the drive, Sarah checked the resuscitation gear per protocol, though we both knew it likely wouldn't be needed. When we arrived at the Pinewood gate, the security guard opened it promptly and directed us to Evergreen Circle. House number 42 was a colonial-style mansion with white pillars and a manicured lawn. Everything about the place radiated wealth and elegance. An elderly woman was waiting at the front door, wearing a silk nightgown and a brocade robe that looked expensive. Her perfectly white hair was neatly styled. Despite the early hour, her face was pale, but there were no signs of tears. "Mrs. Wilson?" Sarah asked as we approached with our gear. The woman gave a brief nod. "Eleanor Wilson. Richard is upstairs in the bedroom. He didn't wake up this morning." There was something off about the way she spoke. Too calm, too composed for someone who just found their spouse dead. But after years on the job, I knew shock could manifest in many ways. We followed Mrs. Wilson up a wide marble staircase to the second floor, then down a hallway lined with expensive paintings to a set of double mahogany doors at the end. She opened them and stepped aside. "In here," she said softly. I woke up and he wasn't breathing. The bedroom was spacious and luxurious, with tall windows overlooking the pine forest behind the property. A canopy king-size bed stood in the center, and on it lay an elderly man with neatly trimmed white hair. Sarah immediately moved to check for vital signs while I set up the portable EKG monitor. But even before she touched him, we both knew. The man's skin was pale blue, and rigor mortis had already begun, indicating he'd been dead for several hours. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilson," Sarah said gently, professionally. "Your husband has passed. Based on his condition, I'd estimate he's been gone for several hours." "No, that can't be," Mrs. Wilson replied in an oddly sing-song tone. "Richard and I had breakfast together this morning. We drank Earl Grey tea and ate his favorite blueberry scones." Sarah glanced at me, a look we had developed to silently say something's not right. "Mrs. Wilson," I spoke, "rigor mortis suggests your husband has been dead for at least 4 or 5 hours." "That's impossible," she repeated in the same tone. "Richard always takes a nap after breakfast." But then he didn't wake up. It was 9:15 a.m. If they had breakfast this morning, his body couldn't possibly be in that condition. Sarah began filling out the death determination form, while I called the police and coroner, per protocol, for an at-home death. Meanwhile, Mrs. Wilson sat in a chair near the window, gazing outside as if waiting for something. "I'll check the bathroom for medications," I whispered to Sarah, who nodded while continuing her paperwork. This was standard procedure to rule out suicide or drug misuse. The luxurious ensuite bathroom had 2 sinks, but only one appeared used. A single toothbrush, 1 razor, 1 set of men's grooming products. Odd for a couple supposedly living together. Returning to the bedroom, my eyes were drawn to a row of photos above the fireplace. In each, on the beach, in front of the Eiffel Tower, on a cruise ship deck, Eleanor Wilson stood with an odd posture, as if embracing someone beside her. Yet she was always alone in the pictures. "Richard is very shy," Mrs. Wilson's voice startled me. She had moved silently and now stood behind me. "He doesn't like to be photographed." "Ah," I said awkwardly. "I see. Everyone thinks I'm crazy," she continued softly. "But they don't understand. True love never dies, Mr. Reeves. Richard always comes back to me." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang, signaling the police's arrival. Mrs. Wilson gracefully went to greet them, leaving Sarah and me with the body. "Mike," Sarah called tensely, "come here." She stood beside the bed, her face pale. "I've used all our monitors. No vitals. Body temperature confirms death occurred hours ago. But what? I swear I saw his finger twitch. Just a little, like a spasm. I looked at the body, skeptical. Maybe a post-mortem reflex? Sarah shook her head. No, and something's weird about his skin. The texture isn't right. I was about to check for myself when Mrs. Wilson returned with 2 police officers. One, a middle-aged man with Hernandez on his badge, greeted us with a professional nod before his eyes landed on the bed. His expression turned to a mix of confusion and frustration. Again, Mrs. Wilson, we've talked about this. He's right there, Mrs. Wilson insisted, pointing to the bed. He's not breathing. You have to believe me. The second officer, a young woman who looked uneasy, stared at us. You actually saw someone in the bed? Sarah and I exchanged shocked glances. Of course, Sarah said. Elderly male, about 70, striped pajamas, deceased, rigor mortis present. Both officers looked at the bed, which I now noticed with horror, was empty and neatly made. No sign of the body we just examined. There's no one there, Officer Hernandez said quietly. The world seemed to spin around me. I knew what I saw. Sarah saw it too. We had even placed EKG electrodes on the man's body. Seeing our confusion, Officer Hernandez pulled us aside while his partner stayed with Mrs. Wilson. Listen, he said quietly. Richard Wilson died of a stroke 3 years ago. Eleanor's never been able to accept it. This is the 7th call like this in the past 2 years. She always reports the same thing, that her husband died in bed. Her doctors say it's a complex combination of early dementia and persistent delusional disorder. But we saw him, Sarah protested. We examined him. Officer Hernandez sighed. I don't know what you saw, but there was no body. No way it could disappear in just a few minutes. I looked at the empty bed, then at the stack of forms Sarah had filled out. Forms with vitals from a body that no longer existed. Maybe we're just exhausted, I muttered weakly. Long shift. We finished the report with shaky hands and left the mansion as quickly as we could. In the ambulance, Sarah stared blankly out the window. What just happened, Mike? She asked after a moment. I don't know, I answered honestly, but we can't both hallucinate the exact same thing at the same time. The truth? We were the only ambulance team that ever saw Mrs. Wilson's husband. Previous crews had always reported an empty bed. Coincidence? Maybe, but coincidence doesn't explain the recorded vitals or the EKG pads placed on a body that vanished. A month later, we got another emergency call from Pinewood Estates, but this time it wasn't a false code black. Eleanor Wilson was found by her housekeeper, peacefully dead in her sleep. Cause of death, a ruptured brain aneurysm. We attended her funeral, something we rarely do for patients, but this case was different. I spoke with the housekeeper who found her. The strange thing about it, she said quietly, she looked so peaceful. Lying on the side of the bed, she always left empty for Richard. Her hand was outstretched, like she was holding someone's. What disturbed me most? The photos at the funeral home. Her family had brought many pictures of Eleanor to display. In one of the latest ones, taken just a week before her death, Eleanor and a handsome elderly man were smiling happily in the backyard of the mansion. Both were clearly visible in the photo, as if Richard Wilson had never left. When I showed the photo to one of her nieces and asked about the man beside Eleanor, she looked at me strangely and said, "That photo is just Eleanor alone in the garden." This third experience is the most recent, happening just last fall. We were on our way back to the station after dropping off a patient at the hospital. The roads were quiet. It was well past midnight. The yellow streetlights reflected off the wet asphalt from a light rain, creating an atmosphere that somehow felt off. Sarah and I were both exhausted. Our 12-hour shift should have ended an hour earlier, but a last-minute emergency call required us to transport an elderly man with heart failure to the ER. A fairly routine case, at least by our standards. I drove in silence, occasionally yawning, while Sarah completed the final report on her tablet. Our radio started acting up, something common in certain dead zones in our area. We were driving through the hilly outskirts of town, where signal often gets disrupted by terrain and tall trees. But this time, through the static, I began to hear what sounded like voices. At first, I assumed it was just interference from another channel. Maybe the fire department, or police using a nearby frequency, or possibly another ambulance on a call. I fiddled with the volume and frequency, hoping to clear the noise. Then I realized the voices sounded like us, not just similar. It was unmistakably my voice and Sarah's. The tone, the inflection, even the way Sarah subtly inhales before speaking in tense situations, it was all too familiar to mistake. "Sarah, are you hearing this?" I asked, my finger hovering over the radio knob. My heart started to race. She nodded, her face pale in the dim dashboard glow. "That's us, but different." I pulled the ambulance over to the side of the road. We both leaned in close to the radio speaker, trying to catch more through the fading static. The air inside the ambulance suddenly felt cold and heavy. Through the interference, we could hear what sounded like me and Sarah performing a resuscitation. But the conversation was strange. There was a desperation in our voices, especially Sarah's, that I'd never heard, even in our worst emergencies.
"No pulse. Start CPR."
That was Sarah, but her voice was hoarse and panicked, more than I'd ever heard.
"It's been 20 minutes, Sarah."
That was me, sounding tired, resigned.
"I don't care. Keep going."
Radio Sarah yelled, her voice cracking.
"Sarah, we need to call the time."
Me again, firm but sorrowful.
"No, I won't lose this one. I can't lose this one, too."
Sarah and I exchanged horrified glances. In 8 years as partners, I'd never seen her lose her professionalism like that. Not even once. And who was this one she was referring to? There was something intensely personal in her tone. Then, more terrifying than anything, my own voice came through.
"Sarah, it's me. You can't save me."
It was so clear, as if I were speaking directly from the speaker. Not the frantic voice of a paramedic to her partner, but a calm voice of someone trying to comfort a grieving friend. The voice of someone who had accepted their fate. The radio suddenly went back to normal. The dispatcher mentioned a code for an ambulance in the northern sector, completely unrelated to us. Sarah and I were silent for the rest of the ride. My mind raced, searching for a logical explanation. Was it a playback from an old call? Impossible. We'd never experienced anything like that. An auditory illusion from exhaustion? Maybe, but we both heard the same thing. The next day, we asked the radio technician if there had been any reported interference that night. He just shrugged and said everything was functioning normally, no anomalies from any other units. We didn't tell him what we actually heard. How could we, without sounding insane? For weeks afterward, the experience haunted me. I began noticing small things, like how Sarah seemed uneasy every time we passed the same route, or how she always double-checked the radio before starting a shift. A few weeks later, during a routine checkup, doctors discovered a previously undetected heart condition, something that could have been fatal if left untreated. A rare arrhythmia capable of causing sudden cardiac arrest with no warning, especially in high-stress jobs like ours. I underwent surgery to have a pacemaker installed. During my recovery, Sarah visited me in the hospital. We finally talked about that night. "Do you think it was a warning?" she asked hesitantly, her voice barely a whisper, even though the room was empty. "I don't know," I answered honestly, but the timing and place were too perfect to call coincidence. Sarah nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about my voice on that radio, that panic, that anger. I've never sounded like that with anyone. Unless the patient was someone very important to you," I said quietly. Our eyes met, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. 8 years of working together builds a bond that's hard to explain to outsiders. We've shared the worst moments of people's lives together, carried the burden of knowing that sometimes all we can do still isn't enough, and now we share this strange secret too. Sometimes I wonder if what we heard was a warning, or perhaps a glimpse of a future we somehow managed to change. Maybe in another version of reality, I had that heart attack in the ambulance, and Sarah tried desperately to save me. Or maybe it was just an eerie coincidence we'll never explain. Whatever it was, I'm grateful every time I finish a shift alive. I touch the scar on my chest as a reminder of how thin the line between life and death can be, and how lucky I am to still be on the right side of it. Since that night, Sarah and I have been more alert to radio disturbances. Sometimes when driving through that same area on a late-night run, we both unconsciously lower the volume and listen. But that strange interference has never returned. Not yet, anyway. When you've worked in EMS long enough, you begin to understand that the line between life and death is thinner than most people think. There are moments that make you wonder if the world is more mysterious than it appears. Sarah and I have seen people leave and come back from the brink of death. Patients declared clinically dead for several tense minutes, only to return with bizarre stories about what they experienced on the other side. Maybe our experiences are just side effects of the job, tired minds drawing patterns from coincidence. The human brain has evolved over millennia to find meaning in randomness as a survival mechanism. Perhaps that's the simplest explanation. Or maybe, just maybe, our ambulance sometimes carries more than the patients we can see. Perhaps death occasionally rides along beside us as we race to save a life, or lost souls find a way to send their final messages. After all I've seen, I can't completely rule that out. Whatever the truth, Sarah and I have an unspoken agreement. We don't discuss the strange things we've experienced with anyone but each other. After all, who would believe us? In a profession grounded in science and strict protocol, there's no room for ghost stories and premonitions. We'd be seen as overstressed or even mentally unfit. So the secrets stay between us, recorded only in our memories, not in any official reports. Now, every time we hear radio interference, we pause and listen closely. I'm not sure what we're hoping or fearing to hear, but if those voices return, we'll be ready to listen to what they have to say. And if you hear an ambulance siren in the still of night in Salem and see unit number 7 pass by, know that Sarah and I are probably on our way to the next call. We'll do everything we can to save the ones who can be saved, comfort the ones who can't, and maybe, just maybe, bridge the world between life and death for a moment. As paramedics, our job is to deal with the real and measurable. Heartbeats, blood pressure, oxygen levels. But sometimes on long, quiet nights, we're reminded there's another dimension to this life, one that can't be explained by medical protocols or measured by our instruments. And maybe that, too, is part of the job, confronting the greatest mystery of all, the thin line between life and death.